Welcome to the Dingir-Zone. Hi, I'm Victor, and today I want to talk about the historicity of Adam and Eve. Now, where do we start in that topic? Well, first I think we should talk about the Garden of Eden and where that might be. Okay, the world is pretty big. Over here you have America, Southern America, and over here you have Europe, Africa, Asia, Russia, China, and yeah, pretty much everything that happens in the Bible happens in this small area here, south of today's Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, this area over here. And here in this area we have two important rivers called Tigris and Euphrates, which go here from Turkey through Iraq to this Persian Gulf down here. Okay. That's also why it's called Mesopotamia, which means land between the two rivers. That's the name back then. And Okay, so what do we know about the Garden of Eden? There is not really that much to know. The Bible doesn't give us many details. But in Genesis 2, verse 11 to 14, it talks about 4 rivers, but this is actually often overlooked. Check this out. God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man. The Hebrew word for man is Adam. So Adam isn't even a proper name, it's just the Hebrew word for man. And it's also very close to the Hebrew word for dirt. God formed man of the dust of the ground, and that's a pun. So that's why Adam is the name there. But it's eastward, okay? That's already a good hint. So since everything happens in this fertile crescent most of the time, called Mesopotamia, we should probably assume that it's more to the east here. And then a river went out of Eden to water the garden. Okay, that's an interesting point. It says here that Eden isn't the garden, right? The river leaves Eden and only then enters the garden. Okay, that's an interesting point that I don't think many people pick up. And from thence it was parted and became 4 heads. Okay, so we get these 4 rivers. But it's not really clear if the river parts in the garden or after it passes through the garden. But okay, anyways, here we now have these 4 names. The name of the first is Pishon, and we don't know what river that is supposed to be. That is it which compasses the whole land of Havilah where there is gold. Okay, remember that Pishon is supposed to surround a land of gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. Okay, I don't know what to make of that. The name of the second river is Gihon. The name is it that compasses the whole land of Cush. Again, we don't know where Kush is supposed to be. We don't know where this river Gihon is supposed to be. The name of the third river is Tigris. Now this is, the fourth is Euphrates. So these are these two big rivers I talked about, right? Tigris and Euphrates. But actually, this is not so clear, because Tigris, when you look into the Hebrew text, you have this word here, which is composed of Chet, Dalet, Kof, and Lamech. So it's like critical or so. And that's actually, when you look into a different translation, King James Version, for example, it speaks of Hiddekel. So it's absolutely not certain that this is actually the river Tigris. But it says here that this river is supposed to go towards the east of Asher. And Asher was an actual city that was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. And where was that? Okay, Asher was also the name of a god. Asher, the city is here. Okay, and the river Tigris actually is on the east of Asher. So I think it really makes sense that we translate this Hiddekel with Tigris, but this is still contested. So there are people arguing against this. And if you are being pedantic, it just says east of Asher, so it could be any river that goes to the east, like maybe this river here. What's the name of this river? Little Zap River. That's also east of Asher, right? So it's debatable, but personally I think Tigris really makes sense. So in the end we have 4 names, and only 2 of them we can identify. So that's really not a good starting point, okay? So let's start looking in other places, and particularly in ancient Near Eastern mythology. What can we find there? And the first thing in that I want to talk about is the city Eridu, which is, as you can see here, pretty close to the Persian Gulf, or was pretty close. You can actually find that through Google Maps. So it's here pretty far east compared to at least Babylon, which is somewhere here. About 100 kilometers south of Baghdad. And it's especially eastward from Israel, so it has that going for it. And Eridu was actually the first city that has ever existed, as far as we know. That's a pretty interesting thing. And it was the main cult center of Enki, also known as Ea, the god of wisdom. And in this city Eridu, there was a holy tree of Eridu. And that holy tree of Eridu is the tree of life. Which is this ancient understanding of the world, similar to Yggdrasil from Norse mythology, where the whole world is this tree, and the firmament is the crown of the tree, and the roots go down into the underworld. And this tree is called the Hulupu tree. Here, Hulupu tree. This Hulupu tree is actually a tree from Sumerian mythology, where this tree was planted by Enki, or Ea, the god of wisdom, and then a storm ripped it out, and it flowed down the river until Inanna picked it up and planted it in her holy garden in Eridu. And actually this story, Inanna and the Hulupu tree, is an interesting story in this regard, because it starts with a creation myth in the very first days, and so on, when everything needed was brought into being. So this is also a creation story like Genesis 1, the creation of the world, which precedes, of course, Genesis 2, where you have the creation of Adam and Eve and the fall of Adam. Now, of course, the question is, what does Hulupu mean? And that's yet another thing we don't know. So this Hulupu tree, we don't know what that actually is. Some people translate Hulupu with apple, but I think that's really just they want it to be apple. Although, if you actually carefully read Genesis 2 and 3, it never says apple there. Okay, it talks about the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It never talks about an apple. Okay, so this is just a modern depiction of this fruit. But so translating Hulupu with apple is really not a good idea, if you ask me. I think a better translation would be pomegranate, because pomegranates were really prominent in these stories. You often had pomegranates there, and when you look for Akkadian depictions of the tree of life, this is a pretty common thing you see there with this. It looks like a palm tree, if you ask me, with this web surrounding it, and oftentimes you have people picking something from these trees. Here, I think this picture shows it relatively good. Here, I don't know, that it seems to have an oval shape with dots on it. I don't know how to identify that. But I think a pomegranate isn't that far off from it. But actually, I've read somewhere in some story, I couldn't find it for this video, but I've read somewhere that Hulupu is supposed to be a nut. And if the tree of life is a palm tree, then, well, it could be a coconut, maybe. And actually that would make sense, because palm trees often grow at oases, and oases are the domain of Enki, and the Hulupu tree was planted by Enki, so that makes sense. And coconuts contain water, right? And water is life, isn't it? So, and also water is the domain of Enki, so that would really make sense to me. But let's continue. The holy tree of Eridu, this tree of life thing here, the roots go down to the underworld, and in the roots there lives a snake. That's an interesting connection to the snake in the Garden of Eden, isn't it? So I think Eridu, the Holden Garden of Inanna, with the holy tree of Eridu, you know, with the snake in the roots, I think that is already a pretty good candidate. But let's talk about Dilmun. Dilmun is the paradise in the ancient mythology. It's the island of the gods where Enki lives, where he has his house. And here in the Wikipedia article it even says Garden of Eden theory. So this is one of the possible candidates. Dilmun has been proven to be the island of Bahrain here. So the island of Bahrain was considered to be paradise. Okay. In some stories, Dilmun has freshwater fountains, although it's an island within a saltwater sea. Okay, and that makes absolutely no sense normally, right? I mean, how could freshwater fountains be on an island surrounded by saltwater? That doesn't make sense. But Bahrain actually had freshwater fountains, although it's surrounded by a saltwater ocean. So because there's underwater connections between Bahrain, these fountains, and some mainland rivers. Okay, and I find that super interesting that something like this ever existed, and it makes total sense that somebody would interpret this as some miracle of God, or especially a water god called Enki, who would turn salt water into fresh water there. And there's actually Sumerian temples on Bahrain. The Baba temple here is mentioned near these freshwater fountains. So we can be pretty certain that Bahrain is Dilmun, and it just makes sense that they would consider this to be the island of Enki. And interestingly enough, that's not so important, but there's actually a famous tree called Tree of Life on Bahrain. This is what it looks like. This is one single tree in the desert. I mean, how can one single tree grow in the desert? But that's a curious thing. But this tree, Shayarat al-Hayat, was dated to only 400 years old. So this is absolutely not the tree from the Garden of Eden. It's much too young to be that. But anyhow, let's talk about the Gilgamesh epic. Here we have the great hero Gilgamesh visiting Dilmun, and on Dilmun he visits Utanapishtim, which is the Sumerian flood hero, the guy who survived the flood, and because he survived the flood, he is still immortal. So Gilgamesh goes to him and asks him, because he wants to know, how can I become immortal, right? And Utnapishtim then tells him, there is a plant like a box thorn, okay, whose thorns will prick your hand like a rose. If your hand reach that plant, you will become a young man again. Okay, so he talks about some plant that will make you young again. Okay, and hearing this, Gilgamesh opened a conduit to the Apsu. Remember, the Apsu is this freshwater ocean where Enki lives and from where he brings the fresh water to the humans. So he opens a conduit to the Apsu. I would say this is really this freshwater fountain on Bahrain, and attached heavy stones to his feet. They dragged him down, and he finds this plant there, but before he can eat it, it's stolen by a snake. Okay, again, a snake, a plant of life. That also sounds a lot like Adam and Eve, right? Interestingly enough, I don't know, somebody has apparently had some humor, and they actually opened a water park on Bahrain called Dilmun. I find that funny. So if you want to go to paradise, Bahrain has an airport, book a flight there. That's how you get to heaven. Okay, let's talk about the next thing that comes into question to be Eden. Here is The Place of the Amorites in the Civilization of Western Asia by George A. Barton. You can find that on JSTOR, page 34. Down here in the footnotes. A plausible argument could be made in favor of the thesis that the author of Genesis was preserving in his description of the location of the Garden of Eden a traditional memory of Gu Edin, the field which plays such a prominent part in the history of the city of Lagash. Okay, Gu Edin is, yeah, if you check this out, there's a zoomer. That's an acre, a field between the cities Umma and Lagash here. And he says here that this field also was called the garden, Gan, and Edin, here. Edin is the Hebrew writing of Eden. Okay, so that would make sense. The field which plays a prominent part in the history of the city of Lagash from 3200 to 2450 BCE. That field is frequently called the Gan, which was beloved of the god Dingir-Zone. Gan being the Semitic word for, being the same Semitic word as the Hebrew Gimel Nun. For this reason, the Gu Edin might easily become in the tradition Gan Edin. Gan Edin is the Hebrew word for Garden of Eden. The river Pishon, remember Pishon was the first of the rivers here. The river Pishon could plausibly derive from Parsia, the name of a canal and pool mentioned by Entemena, that's the king of Lagash, by supposing that the R of Parsia had been changed into the corresponding liquid N. Gihon might easily be a corruption of Girnun, part of the Sumerian name of a canal at Lagash, often called Luma Girnunta. At Lagash too there was a sacred forest that would correspond to the tree in the midst of the garden. All the elements of Eden are present so far as physical characteristics are concerned, and all the names of physical objects. Only Adam, Eve and the serpent and the fall are lacking. Even these are possibly present by implication. For the grain of Gan Eden was fruit forbidden to the men of Umma. Their god Shara tempted them to take it. Ningirsu was angry and cast them out of Gan Eden. Thereupon a boundary ditch, a stele, and emblems of the gods were called into existence like cherubim to keep them out. here, when God throws Adam and Eve out of Eden, he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden the cherubim and this flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way to the tree of life. If such coincidences, or half their number, could be found in Amurru, would it not be regarded as proof that the Garden of Eden was West Semitic and Amorite origin? Yeah, I find that pretty compelling, and I don't think that this is the final answer. I don't think that this is really the story of Adam and Eve wholesale. I think parts of this were taken. I think this may have been something like the basic story, and then they have woven some other stories around that, which we will also talk about. But I at least think that they might have actually taken the names from here, from this vulture stele and these other references he makes here, cone A3 and so on. Yeah, this history he's talking about here is actually this Umar Lagash war. Yeah, that was a war for this field Gu Edin, which is documented on the vulture stele. Okay, now let's talk about Adapa. Adapa is a character from Sumerian mythology. He's a human who is either a son or just a priest of Enki, who lives in Eridu, and he is a fisherman. And yeah, the story is pretty short. I think we will go through most of it. What happens here is that Ea, an epithet of Enki, granted Adapa wisdom, but he did not grant him eternal life. Okay, that's already a pretty interesting connection, because Adam gains knowledge by eating from the tree of knowledge, right? But he is then thrown out of the Garden of Eden so that he cannot also eat from the tree of eternal life. So he also has wisdom, but not eternal life. This Adapa is characterized as blameless, of clean hands, anointed, observer of the divine statutes. And yeah, as a fisherman, he goes to his ship, the ship he steered, fishing and hunting for Eridu. So he wants to catch some fish for Eridu. And yeah, this is a bit unfortunate. While Ea, then the next word is just lost. It's broken. The tablet is broken there. While Ea does something in the chamber upon the bed. Well, what do you do on a bed? You sleep there. So I would say that Ea is sleeping, I guess. He embarked upon the ship. The wind blew and his ship departed with the oar, but steered his ship upon the broad sea. Now there's again something broken, but it's later mentioned that his ship is capsized. So we know what happens there in this broken part. And then in the next tablet, Adapa says, "O south wind, thy wing will I break. 7 days the south wind blew not upon the land." Okay, let's. This might be completely off, but let's talk about Matthew 8, 23 to 26. Jesus enters a ship, his disciples followed him. A great tempest in the sea arose. The ship was covered with the waves, but he, Jesus, was asleep. Interesting. Ea was apparently sleeping. Here Jesus is sleeping, while there is a strong tempest in the sea. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the sea, and there was a great calm. So Jesus has the same superpower as Adapa. He can control the sea. He can control the waves. Okay, back to the myth of Adapa. Now Anu, which is one of the main gods in Sumerian mythology, called to his messenger, "Why has the south wind not blown upon the land for 7 days?" His messenger answered him, "My lord, Adapa the son of Ea, the wing of the south wind has broken." When Anu heard these words, he cried, "Help!" He ascended his throne. "Let someone bring him." Okay, so Anu now commands that Adapa is brought to him. The god of knowledge, Ea, Enki, who knows the heaven, gave him counsel. He counsels Adapa. He teaches him what to do when he goes to heaven, saying, "Adapa, before the face of Anu the king, thou art to go to heaven. When thou standest before Anu, food of death will they set before thee, eat not." That's really, really, really interesting because, that's pretty much exactly what happens in Genesis 2:17. Of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat. He also tells him not to eat something because otherwise he will die. Okay, that's exactly the same thing Enki tells Adapa here. The messenger of Anu came and says, "Adapa has broken the wing of the south wind, bring him before me." So he now comes to take Adapa to heaven. The road to heaven he made him take. Okay, there's a road to heaven. Well, whatever. And to heaven he ascended. When he came to heaven, when he approached the door of Anu, that's not so interesting. Then Adapa meets Anu, the king. Anu says, "Come hither, Adapa. Why hast thou broken the wings of the south wind?" Adapa answered, "My lord, for the house of my lord in the midst of the sea, I was catching fish. The sea was like a mirror. The south wind blew and capsized me. To the house of my lord I was driven, the ocean, the house of his lord, the water god Enki. In the anger of my heart I took heed." Then Anu calms down. But this is super interesting again. Anu understands that Ea gave counsel to Adapa. So Adapa has knowledge he should not have. Why has Ea revealed to impure mankind the heart of heaven and earth? So Anu is angry that Adapa has divine knowledge that humans shouldn't have, and that is exactly what happens in Genesis 3:11. God said, "Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat?" Okay, he's also upset that he has knowledge that he shouldn't have. And I think you could also argue that Prometheus bringing fire to the humans could also be connected to that. But in the Adapa myth, what happens here now is that they don't bring him food of death, they bring him food of life. Bring him that he may eat food of life. Okay, so what Ea had told him was wrong. Okay. Now the question is, was Ea just wrong about what would happen? But that's very uncommon. I cannot think of another story where Ea is ever wrong about anything. Okay, he's a god of wisdom. He always knows everything. So it's really out of character that he would be wrong about anything. I personally think that what happens here is that Enki has deliberately lied to Adapa because he doesn't want him to become immortal. Okay. And why wouldn't he want that? Well, in a different story, Enki himself is the one who decides that humans should be mortal. Okay. So if Adapa became immortal now, and his descendants would be immortal maybe, then there would be too much noise again, and Enlil would decide to bring another flood, probably. But yeah, so I think that Enki has lied to Adapa, and I recently heard that this Genesis 3:11 proves that God had lied to Adam also. You know, he said you will die if you eat from that tree, but the fact that here he asks, hast thou eaten of the tree? So this is the first thing he thinks of after he hears that Adam says he's naked, right? So he knows what would happen when you eat from that tree, and that is something different than what he told Adam. Therefore, God lied to Adam. Okay? So God lied to Adam, Enki lied to Adapa. But actually, I want to stress another point here. Food of life they brought him, but he ate not. Okay? So he obeys Ea's command, right? And that's a huge difference to Genesis. So if Genesis has really taken this from this story, if the original story said that Adapa obeyed, it means there is no original sin. Okay? And if there is no original sin, then humans don't inherit this original sin, which means that we don't go to hell by default. Okay? So we don't have to do something like finding Jesus or following the Ten Commandments to go to heaven, right? And even if Jesus existed, his death wouldn't atone for anything. Okay, this would mean that Christianity is entirely built on nothing. Okay, the foundations would just not exist. Okay, another point in favor of Genesis taking from this myth of Adapa: garments they brought him, he clothed himself. Genesis 3:21, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skins, and they clothed them. Personally, I think this is there to explain why humans have pubic hair, but anyhow, I think this is again a pretty strong connection between these two stories. Then Anu sends Adapa back to Earth, so he loses access to the fruit of life, and just like Adam and Eve lose access to the tree of life. Yeah, down here Anu then summons Ea, but a lot of this is broken, and I don't know, maybe he punishes Ea for something, but if anything, Ea has sinned against Anu here. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe that's the original sin then, that Ea has sinned against Anu, and Adapa, being possibly a son of Ea, maybe then inherits that sin. I don't know, but whatever. But what about Eve? So far we've only talked about the Garden of Eden and Adam. What about Eve? And for this I want to talk about the story Enki and Ninchosang. That's ETCSL 1.1.1. If you want to look it up. What happens here? Here we have Enki and Ninchosang, who are on the moon. And yeah, here's also again when Utu steps up into heavens, fresh water shall run out of the ground for you from the standing vessels. I think that's talking about the freshwater fountains on Bahrain again. Enki had lain down with Ninsi Kila. That place was virginal, that place was pristine. Sounds like a paradise also. Now down here in line 49A to 49P, the numbering is off here because these are some additional lines that were found later. But it says here, may the land of Tukrit hand over to you gold from Harali, and some other stuff and some other locations. This reminds me a lot here of Genesis 2, 11 to 14, with this list, Pishon, which compasses the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. This Havilah is some kind of a land of gold, maybe like El Dorado or something. And this Harali here is also a source of gold. And on JSTOR, again, by the way, you can just create an account on JSTOR and for free, and you can read up to 100 articles per month for free. So don't worry, you can access these things that I'm showing you here. So there's this JSTOR article that's unfortunately in German, but there's this article, Das mythische Goldland Harali im alten Vorderasien. And this is a pretty extensive analysis of where this land Harali might be. And they say that this Harali is often mentioned in lists of places that actually existed. So they very confidently say that Harali probably was an actual location. And they say that it should be somewhere northeast of Mesopotamia, so it would be somewhere here. And now get this. This area here is also known as Bactria. And when you look into Genesis 2:12 again, it speaks here of this bdellium, which also comes from this Havilah. Okay, and what is bdellium? It's a kind of resin similar to frankincense or myrrh, and it says here, according to Pliny, the best quality came from Bactria. Interesting. So this bdellium is also mentioned in relation to this area here in northern Iran. Yeah, but because of that, I think it's really probable that Genesis 2, this land Havilah, this land of gold, is actually talking about the same place that Enki and Ninhursag is talking about here under the name Harali. Okay, and if they are talking about the same place in the same context, I think that's a good indication that Genesis at least partially takes from Enki and Ninhursag. The beginning of the story is a bit boring. You have Enki sleeping with his daughter, begetting a granddaughter, then sleeping with a granddaughter, begetting a great-granddaughter, and so on, until there is his great-great-granddaughter Utu. Here, Utu. Now, in line 127, Nintur, that's an epithet of Ninhursag, the mountain goddess. Nintur said to Utu, let me advise you. Enki will set eyes on you. The lines are fragmentary, but Nintur apparently warns Utu not to sleep with Enki. So there you again have some divine warning, like the warning where Enki or Ea told Adapa not to eat. But again, we have the topic of some food, because Utu says to Enki that she will sleep with him if he brings cucumbers, apples, and grapes. Okay, so Enki then brings cucumbers, apples, and grapes. Then down here he sleeps with her. Here, Utu's womb, she conceived the semen, in the womb the semen of Enki. Similar stuff is in the vulture stele, by the way, where the semen of the king is planted by a god. Okay, he sleeps with her, but then Utu regrets the decision. Here, Utu cries out, "Woe my thighs!" And Ninjo-sang, the mountain goddess, removes the semen from her. And then from that semen grow a few strange plants. The tree plant, the honey plant, the vegetable plant, esparto grass, atutu plant, and then here Enki wonders about these plants, and his minister Izumut pulls up fruit from these plants, and Enki ate it. Okay, Enki eats these strange plants. Okay, that's really, really interesting, because the next thing that happens here is that Ninjo-sang curses Enki. Okay, just like God cursing or throwing out Adam after he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, here Ninjo-sang curses Enki. Okay, so there's also some divine retribution, and then I don't know, a fox talks to the main god Enlil, and there's again stuff missing, and in the end Ninjo-sang decides to cure Enki, so she reverses her decision to curse him. And now this is really the most important thing maybe in this entire video. Here in line 247 to the end, what happens is that Ninjo-sang heals Enki by asking him what part of you hurts. He then tells her parts of him that hurt, like for example here the top of his head, and then Ninjo-sang takes these parts of his body and creates new goddesses out of them. Okay, and now get this. Down here, my ribs hurt me. So Ninjo-sang also takes a rib and creates the goddess Ninti. Okay, and that's an interesting point. Again, the name Ninti. You see here, Nin means lady. That's a prefix that goddesses always have. Ninti means lady of the rib, right? Because Ti is the Sumerian word for rib, right? So Ninti is the lady of the rib, but that's also a pun. The Sumerians loved puns, and Ti also means life. Okay, so Ninti is also the lady of life. Okay, and when you compare that now to Genesis 3:20, and the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. She's the mother of life, depending on the translation. And even the name Eve in Hebrew is Cheva, which is Hebrew for mother of life. Okay, so the name Eve translated to Sumerian would be Ninti. And yeah, this is just way too specific, right? You have two characters with the same name basically and the same origin story being created of someone's rib. This is just too specific. It is absolutely out of the question that this part of Genesis is taking from Enki and Ninhursag. It would be absolutely ridiculous to deny that. So yeah, at this point we can absolutely conclude there was no Adam and Eve, there was no original sin. We are not going to hell by default. So you can stop worrying and just live your life, okay? The last thing I want to talk about is Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of fertility and love and sex. Here on the Wikipedia page under Origin Myths, you will find the story that the Sumerian hymn Inanna and Utu contains a myth describing how Inanna became the goddess of sex. At the beginning of the hymn, Inanna knows nothing of sex, so she begs her brother Utu to take her to Kur, the Sumerian underworld, so that she may taste the fruit of a tree that grows there, which will reveal to her all the secrets of sex. And yeah, when you look into the reference here, it says like 1998, okay? And at first I was actually going to dismiss this story here because I absolutely couldn't verify that this actually exists, okay? Because this book here, like a dictionary of ancient Near Eastern mythology, this book here, seems to be the only source for this story, okay? And it's pretty expensive, so I didn't want to buy it, and I just couldn't find this story anywhere else, okay? So I was about to dismiss it, but I just couldn't, okay? I just had to know if this story was true. And so yeah, I actually bought this book on Kindle here for $50. Don't tell my wife. Just for this one page, just this one page here I wanted to see with the story Inanna and Utu. And here it actually says that this is what happens there. She wants to go down to Kur, the Sumerian underworld, and here she gives a different reference. And this is really what I was looking for. This is what I paid $50 for, because this Kramer 1985, Samuel Noah Kramer, is a pretty big name in the field. Here, bread for Enlil, sex for Inanna. That's the real reference we are looking for here. And you find that on JSTOR.org, article 23.631. And yeah, here we actually have this story down here. My brother, awesome Lord, I would ride with you to the mountain. This is actually a bit of a difference here because the Wikipedia page said it was the underworld, right? But that's the thing. The underworld is named Kur, and Kur is also a Sumerian word for mountain. And yeah, this actual story here talks about the mountain of herbs, the mountain of cedars, the mountain of chashur trees, don't know what that is, the mountain of silver, the mountain of lapis lazuli. Again, reminds me a bit of Genesis to this list of lands and what can be found there. But here onyx stone, I think, might be lapis lazuli. I don't know, but notice it says here mountain. That's a different translation of Kur, and I think it makes much more sense to translate it with mountain, because it talks here about the mountain of cedars, the mountain of silver, and that is a pretty common description of the Lebanon in ancient mythology. Okay, so because of this here, I think that Lebanon could be another location that might be meant by the Garden of Eden, and I think that actually is one of the that's one of the locations that might be the locations of the Garden of Eden here in this Wikipedia article about Eden. Okay, so this would speak for the hypothesis that Lebanon is the Garden of Eden, at least the Silver Mountains there. And it actually says here, I am one who knows not that which is womanly, copulating. That which exists in the mountain, let us eat. After the herbs had been eaten, after the cedars had been eaten, having put your hand on my hand, return me to my house. So here we don't have this divine warning that's being ignored, but here we have the goddess of sex talking about eating something to get knowledge. And knowledge is in ancient mythology very closely connected to sex. It's when in the Bible it says somebody has known his wife or something like that, it means that they have sex with their wife. And that's also to be found in Zoroastrian literature, so there they are using the same language. Connecting knowledge with sex totally makes sense. And here the goddess of sex getting knowledge of sex, may be connected to that. Okay, so that was a lot of informations here, but I think it's really interesting. And what are your thoughts? Write it in the comments. Do you think original sin is out of the question now? Which of these hypotheses do you think is the Garden of Eden, if any? Write it in the comments. If you like this video, like it, share it, subscribe, and see you next time.